Good evening. You'll forgive my lack of enthusiasm tonight. Some missions leave a mark, not on the body, but on the conscience. What you're about to hear concerns one of our lesser-known operations, codenamed Hornline. It took place in the Central African jungle during the summer of 1996, a mission born not from confrontation with demons or revenants, but from humanity's most persistent monster, greed. This was the hunt for the Abada Poachers. It began as these things often do, with death. 4 Abada, 2 adults, a juvenile and an infant, found in the underbrush, their small frames hacked apart, their horns gone. You must understand, the Abada are not mere animals, and in their way they're closer to spirits than beasts, guardians of purity, peace and balance in the jungles of Central and West Africa. The local tribes call them the 2 horned healers. The Western world, in its arrogance, calls them African unicorns. Both are right, and both entirely miss the point. When you kill an Abada, you don't just take its life, you wound the very forest itself. And let's be clear about what we're dealing with. An Abada stands about 4 feet at the shoulder, built like a cross between a zebra and an antelope. Its coat gleams like polished mahogany, and its horns 2 elegant spiraling crescents. Those horns are said to neutralise poison, and it's that particular bit of folklore that might doom them. The myth spread that powdered Abada horn could cure illness, break curses, even bring back lost vitality. None of it's true, of course. Biologically, their horns are simple keratin, no different than your fingernails, but truth has never stood between mankind and making profit. To the people of the Congo Basin, the Abada are sacred. They're considered guardians of the fertility, protectors of rivers, embodiments of purity. But to poachers, they're just a paycheck. The poachers, well, they were skilled. They moved like ghosts through the trees. 5 men, military precision, armed with silenced rifles and black market tracking gear. But every hunter leaves a trail, as I know. Broken branches, scorched soil, a dropped cartridge. By dusk, I had their direction, north towards a narrow river that could ferry them out with their trophies. In this line of work you learn to read the land as one reads a confession. Every snapped twig told me that I already knew that this was no opportunistic killing, this was an organised ring, and so I followed. They chose a clearing beside a river bend, efficient, isolated, temporary. 4 men were awake when I arrived before dawn. They were laughing, eating from tin bowls. The 5th man, their lookout, he was less fortunate. I introduced him to the concept of silence, permanently. The remaining 4 didn't laugh for long. Their camp was a grotesque display of greed, horns piled like trophies, traps smeared with blood. I counted 12 snares, meaning they'd intended to capture more. I gave them a chance to surrender. Honestly. But they declined. Combat in the jungle is chaos. Visibility drops to 3 meters. Every sound echoes, and the air itself, it feels alive. They went for their guns. They didn't reach them. When the smoke cleared, 3 lay dead. The 4th I kept alive. Briefly. Long enough to learn where they'd been selling the horns. Kinshasa. A syndicate called itself the Ivory Line, a familiar name in our archives. Then, as mercy allowed, I made sure he could never harm another creature again. Justice in the field is rarely elegant, but it is sometimes necessary. I burned their camp to the ground, destroyed the traps, recovered what horns remained and buried them in the consecrated soil of a forest, deep beneath a tree. Some may call that symbolic. I call it respect. When dawn came, I returned to the site of the first slaughter, to those 4 Abada whose lives had been taken. I laid their bodies to rest beneath a mound of earth, marked by a single stone, and there I made a vow that for every innocent life stolen for profit, I would take a piece of the empire that allowed it. They call it the Abada, a creature of healing and of mystery. Its jewel horns glimmer in the light, and the purity of its presence blesses the forest that shelters it. Dr. David Livingstone recorded those words in 1865. Even then the Abada occupied a sacred place in the mythology of the region. He never found one. Not truly, but perhaps that was the point. Some mysteries are not meant to be captured, only respected. Still have his notes, actually. They serve as a reminder that even science must occasionally bow to wonder. Now, cadets, let's speak plainly. Your work will not always involve demons or vengeful spirits. Sometimes the monsters you face will be human, and they will smile while they kill. Our directive as a supernatural defence force is not merely to confront the supernatural, it is to protect the balance between the natural and the unseen. The Abada were not supernatural aggressors, they were guardians, and when their guardianship was violated, it became our duty to act. Well, my duty. Every cryptid species, every mythic being we monitor represents a story humanity once told to understand the world. When we destroy them, we erase a piece of our collective soul, you know. The ivory line I mentioned earlier wasn't unique. Similar groups operate across every continent, trafficking not just ivory, but dragon scales, phoenix feathers, and relics of creatures most governments would deny even existed. They are the unseen predators of the modern age, profiting from extinction itself. And yet, when we stop them, when we burn their camps or shatter their markets, there's no glory, no medals, just quiet victories known only to those who keep the world balanced. That night in the jungle, as the fires burned and the first rain fell, I looked up through the canopy and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Two small shapes watching me from the tree line. They were Abada. They were alive. They watched in silence, their horns glimmering faintly in the stormlight, and then they vanished into the green. Remember this, cadets. The war for the supernatural is not always fought in shadows or hellfire. Sometimes it's fought with conscience, with the courage to stand between greed and grace, and the will to kill for what you believe.